Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I can live up to those expectations. But in my simple read of things, we have 315 days to go to Brexit. If we're to believe it, it'll happen. I've always said from the outset, this is not about Brexit, but about Fix-It. And I've looked at it almost as a fairy tale, that in the 45 years of our participation in the EU, that the fairy tale started about once upon a time. And clearly we had good times, but I would be concerned about the ending, and I'll hold my breath on that as to whether it will be the lived happily ever after. I've been introduced both as a farmer and politician and teacher. I have to say I spent 25 years in local government in a county, for those who may not know it too well, of Louth, which is equidistant between Dublin and Belfast. But I've also looked at the history, I think it would be remiss if I didn't mention it, of Liverpool, and it's almost the same in anywhere you go, whether it's in Washington or New York. The connections with Ireland. I was sorry that the mayor isn't still here, because one of the first mayors originated for the city of Liverpool from Cork, not to mention that you're referred to here as the second capital of Ireland. But one little interesting fact is that your chief fire officer, and indeed the founder of the Liverpool Post, also was from Ireland. Reference was made earlier as well to St Luke's here at the centre of Liverpool. Just a little anecdote that I will refer to at the end of my speech. There's a St Luke's in Formby, to which I'm a regular visitor and have been killing two birds with the one stone by being here today, where an infamous songwriter called Percy French from Frank Feehan's constituency of Roscommon, who's buried in the graveyard of St Luke's. And by the way, we're not related, Frank or I, by having the tie. That's the British-Irish tie. But I decided today I'd also show you that my commitment to Europe by the socks, which are a great anecdote as well for people showing their colours in Ireland. But Percy French wrote the song Where the Mountains of Mourne Sweep Down to the Sea, which I'm sure many made famous by Don McLean. And I think it's important maybe to leave what I want to quote on that to the very end. I just want to start by saying I'm 60 years of age next week, born in 1958. I was young enough to have lived 10, 11 years of the border, where peace reigned to a degree. But 1969 changed not just my life, but my family's life, in that my late dad was a senior court official. And from a situation of visiting the glens of Antrim and every part of Northern Ireland as a family, stopped. I should say my mother was the only one with initiative who would go into Newry an odd time to smuggle a pair of good pyjamas for us. Anyway, that changed things dramatically, and those visits, for all intents and purposes, stopped. Where I currently live would be part of what many in the past referred to as bandit country, in close proximity to places like Crossmaglen, or indeed the infamous Hackballs Cross. Where my parents live is just 2 miles from that, and where I currently live is just 1 mile from my parents' home. I saw from my bedroom window the first body of the disappeared being discovered before they were called the bodies of the disappeared, in the name of a guy called Eugene Evans. Where I currently live, one of the more recent bodies of the disappeared was discovered within sight of where I now live. Let's roll the clock forward to 1972-73, when we know we joined the EU. Suffice to say that from a southern perspective, the growth and improvement in the economy as a result of EU membership was evident. In fact, for many years previously, those living in the south looked to the north, particularly in envy with their infrastructure and roads there. Suddenly, within a short few years of membership of the EU, that vision was reversed, and now our infrastructure still is looked on envy by people from the north. What is wrong? I'll give you an analysis of it. People are not alone looking south, but they're looking south for leadership and a resolution to the dual impasses to be resolved, that being obviously Brexit and indeed the continuation of the peace process. It took that peace process and the Good Friday Agreement to remove the physical barriers many referred to this morning here, army checkpoints disappearing, customs disappearing. Suddenly all barriers have disappeared, and the only sense of being in another territory, believe it or not, despite the monetary situation, which came in the 90s, is that you have kilometre signage on our roads, and as soon as you cross an invisible border, it changes to miles. I want to refer people here in this room, firstly to a man that was here this morning, Michael Dugan, who we've had in Ireland to discuss the issue, but equally his thoughts to me are invaluable in terms of what the situation is in relation to Brexit and Ireland. But equally, any of you who have been familiar with Dr. Katie Hayward and Dr. Finnemore from Queen's University Belfast, but they clearly talk about any plans for customs with a technology on a currently invisible border, north and south, would be dangerous in all sorts of terms. It would represent the reopening of that gaping wound. The negative effects of Brexit are already evident in the north, with the creation of a new divide. Somebody earlier used the same phrase I'm going to use. The peace process is very fragile. We're 20 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, but the persistence in sectarianism is still visible. I challenge anybody to Google on any one day. You would have 2 or 3 major events that are not even been covered by the media. Indeed, the need for public space has always been a key to resolving conflict, whether it's in buildings, street names or flags. We do have religious differences, but we are basically the same people. Hence, that vibrant civic space is vital as a symbol of citizenship, promoting respect for one another. In the days of old, which was dominated by ghastly images of the latest atrocity, countless limbs were embroiled in the maelstrom of violence and swept through the north of Ireland. It was through that cloud of violence that the light of the EU pierced through. The European community, it providing strong leadership, both north and south then, and indeed within the UK, with help from our neighbours in America and elsewhere. Progress helped to lay the foundation for the Good Friday Agreement through many peace funds, such as the International Fund for Ireland, Interreg, and indeed the various peace programmes that have helped to reshape not just the border communities, but indeed communities right across the north of Ireland and beyond. I should say a lot of that money still hasn't trickled down, and the psychological effects of the troubles in the north are still too evident to this day. Brexit then struck me and the others with a thunderbolt of collective amnesia. Memories of economic divides and violence then scarred the island seemed to be cast aside. The constant and persistent arduous task of binding and nurturing the wounds of the past really have been arbitrarily dismissed. It is all the more frustrating for me and others to witness this action being compounded by the bobbing and weaving, as I describe it, over the special circumstances of Northern Ireland. The debate referred to earlier around the backstop agreement is deeply worrying. The fact is that post-2019 there will remain in Northern Ireland 1.8 million people who are entitled to claim EU citizenship. The repercussions of the Brexit vote are being avoided, and words such as fudged was used, or indeed a deliberate ambiguity in the many corridors of power. This avoidance has fuelled attacks on the Good Friday Agreement itself, collateral damage in what's basically an internal political war. I believe that the Good Friday Agreement is that cornerstone, and I sense that here with everybody here today, of the peace on the island of Ireland, and it must be protected at all costs within any Brexit talks. I'm not foolish enough to believe that everything is perfect with the Good Friday Agreement. It was in fact revisited with the St Andrews and the various other revisits, but this is now the only show in town, and while we can look at it at a later stage, it would be foolish to do otherwise. There are a number of steps, in my view, that must be taken now to protect that integrity of the Good Friday Agreement. We use in Ireland the word no backsliding, I say hunker sliding, on the commitments given into the phase 1 of the agreement. We all know no hard border on the island of Ireland, Northern Ireland to be designated with a special economic zone. Recognise the right of those 1.8 million citizens in the north who are entitled to EU citizenship, and to uphold the Good Friday Agreement which of course we all know is an internationally recognised one. New formal structures for dialogue between the UK and Ireland post-Brexit in a Nordic-style Council of Ministers. Domestically, we need the government to show leadership, which they, in Ireland, in the south, we certainly are, but we need to drop the wait-and-see approach of the British government. We need to see greater leadership and preparation from that government. There must be strategies and contingency plans by our own government in all scenarios. And with that in mind, I do want to compliment the governing party in Ireland, indeed, for the civil dialogue which was set out, and I would recommend to anybody who's in any doubt about any of the difficulties that they would read that. EU reform funds need to help countries like Ireland and the regions that are most exposed to Brexit, and finally to ensure stability and future of the EU. The EU has helped to bridge the divide between Ireland and the UK also, and that division and friendships and culture now risks being damaged. It has played, that's the EU, a direct role in sustaining that peace across the island with all those key funding projects which are too numerous to mention. We cannot allow the act of political vandalism, that being Brexit, to fatally undermine the progress. Leaderships on the steps I have outlined, in my view, will help to staunch the bleeding and arrest the slide into the old divisions. The energy of the potential of the Good Friday Agreement has been sapped in the mire of partisan political bickering. Indeed, in the last 2 years of the Good Friday Implementation Committee, the issues of the Good Friday Implementation Committee have been subsumed by Brexit. Likewise, the European Union has dealt a serious blow in the loss of the UK, and we can't forget that. But it still and will remain the EU's being the best successful transitional unit in the history of the globe. And I hope that the UK can still see a need to row back. But we all need a fresh injection of energy and optimism to revive their fundamental promise. I firmly believe that we must use the hard jolt of Brexit to kick-start all of them back into life. I look back at the dark old days of the Troubles with a deep sense of sadness, of the lives lost and the potential that has been wasted. But there is also a strong awareness of a collective capacity to change. Frank referred earlier to Seamus Mallon and the SDLP, and he said recently, out of the sectarian quagmire was negotiated a new dispensation. That showed me that we can rise up to great challenges and solve what are apparently insurmountable problems. That's the attitude and leadership we need to prevent Brexit exploding from a vote of what I call political vandalism to an act of geopolitical mutilation. In conclusion, I owe it to my children, as we all do in this room and beyond, and for future generations, to bring down barriers, to create better trade opportunities, and to explore greater movement of people, and to do away with our cultural misunderstandings. The UK and Ireland have come some distance in recent years in all those issues, and it is only through respect on both islands for our communities that we can live in a true Europe. And finally, I referred to the area that I live in, which is but it borders the mountains of Mourne through in the Cooley Peninsula, and indeed Carlingford Lough for anybody who knows it on the map. And when Percy French wrote the song about the mountains of Mourne, there's a very interesting piece in it that says, "I saw England's king from the top of a bus. Still I don't know him. He still claims to know us. And and though by the Saxons we once were oppressed, still I cheered with the rest. And since that he's visited Erin's green shores, we've been much better friends than we've been heretofore. When we get what we want, we're as quiet as can be, where the mountains of Mourne sweep down to the sea. Good morning.